It was the night of June 5th, 1944. Across the fields of southern England, the air itself seemed to tremble, not from the wind, not from distant thunder, but from the sound of 1,000 engines roaring to life in the darkness. C-47 transport planes, stretching from horizon to horizon, wing to wing, as far as the human eye could see, each one crammed with paratroopers, boys who'd never left their hometowns until 6 months ago, farm kids from Iowa who still smelled like corn and cattle, factory workers from Detroit with grease still under their fingernails, high school graduates from Brooklyn who'd kissed their mothers goodbye and promised they'd write every week, none of them older than 25, most of them just 19. They sat in the bellies of those planes, knees pressed against each other, gear digging into their backs, trying not to think about what came next. Because what came next was a jump into hell. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, the largest military operation in human history, D-Day. But here's what those 13,000 young men sitting in those planes didn't know. Here's what their commanders didn't tell them during the final briefing. Here's the secret that would have made every single one of them refuse to board those aircraft. They were about to fly directly into the crosshairs of their own Navy. Because 48 hours earlier on June 3rd, 1944, at 1400 hours, Allied Naval Command had issued Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha to every warship in the English Channel. The order was simple, clear, unambiguous. Effective 0001 hours, June 6th, 1944. Any aircraft flying below 1,500 feet altitude over Channel Sector coordinates 7 through 12 will be considered hostile. Engage immediately. No identification required. No exceptions. No warnings. It made sense at the time. The Germans had been flying low-altitude night raids, skimming just above the water to avoid radar, dropping mines, attacking supply convoys. The Navy was losing ships, so they drew a line, 1,500 feet. Anything below that line dies. But there was a problem, a catastrophic, unthinkable problem that no one in Naval Command had considered. The C-47 transport planes carrying the American paratroopers were going to drop their men at 600 feet. Half the Navy's kill zone. And those planes didn't have IFF transponders. They didn't have identification lights bright enough to see from the water. They didn't have any way to tell the ships below, "Don't shoot, we're American." In the darkness, to a nervous 19-year-old gunner on a destroyer, those planes would look exactly like German bombers, and that gunner's orders were crystal clear. Shoot first, ask questions later. 13,000 American paratroopers flying into a wall of friendly fire from 50 Allied warships, each armed with 40mm Bofors guns, 20mm Oerlikon cannons, 50 caliber machine guns, all designed to shred aircraft. The math was simple. The math was horrifying. If those ships opened fire, the entire airborne assault would be annihilated before a single paratrooper touched French soil. D-Day would fail before it even started. And somewhere in the chaos of that night, in the belly of one C-47 Chalk number 12, stick number 6, sat a 22-year-old radio operator from Cleveland, Ohio. His name was James Michael Dolan, and he was about to make a decision that would save 10,000 lives by breaking every rule in the United States Army. He was about to use a code that didn't officially exist, a code the military had forbidden anyone below the rank of major to ever transmit. A code that, if he was wrong, would brand him a traitor and get him executed by firing squad. But if he was right, he'd prevent the greatest friendly fire massacre in military history. This is his story, and for 60 years, no one knew it existed. James Michael Dolan. Everyone called him Jimmy. Born March 14th, 1922, Cleveland, Ohio. East Side, the poor side. His father, Patrick Dolan, worked in the Republic Steel Mill, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Came home every night smelling like coal dust and sweat. Hands so calloused they felt like leather. His mother, Catherine, took in laundry from the wealthier families on the West Side. She'd scrub collars and cuffs until her knuckles bled, hang shirts on lines strung across their tiny apartment, iron until midnight. Jimmy was the oldest of 5 kids, which meant that when the Depression hit in 1929, when Jimmy was just 7 years old, he became the man of the house while his father worked. He helped his mother hang laundry, watched his younger siblings, stole coal from the rail yards when winter came and they couldn't afford heat. He was 9 years old when he started doing that. 9 years old, sneaking through chain-link fences in the dark, stuffing coal into a burlap sack, running home before the rail cops caught him. By the time Jimmy was 16, he'd dropped out of East High School. Not because he was dumb, he was sharp. Teachers said he had a mind for numbers, could do complex arithmetic in his head faster than most kids could do it on paper. But his family needed money, so Jimmy went to work. He got a job delivering newspapers at 4 a.m., then a job at a corner grocery store stocking shelves, then a job at the Lowe's movie theater as an usher, wearing a second-hand uniform 2 sizes too big. He'd work 14-hour days, come home with $8 in his pocket, hand it all to his mother. That was his life. Until December 7th, 1941. Jimmy was 19 years old, working the evening shift at the theater, when someone burst through the doors and shouted, "The Japs just bombed Pearl Harbor." Everyone in the theater stood up. The movie kept playing, some Cary Grant picture, but no one was watching anymore. Jimmy walked out into the street. Cleveland was alive. People everywhere, shouting, crying, radios blaring from every shop window, President Roosevelt's voice crackling over the airwaves. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Jimmy stood on the corner of Euclid Avenue, hands in his pockets, watching the chaos, and he made a decision. The next morning, December 8th, Jimmy Dolan walked into the Army recruiting station on Superior Avenue. There was already a line. 200 men. Young guys, old guys, guys in factory coveralls, guys in 3-piece suits, all waiting to sign up. Jimmy stood in line for 3 hours. When he finally got to the desk, the recruiter, a grizzled sergeant with a scar across his jaw, looked him up and down. "How old are you, son?" "19, sir." "You look about 15. "I'm 19, the sergeant grunted. "You got a trade? Any skills?" "I can do math fast. I'm good with my hands. I work hard." The sergeant scribbled something on a form. "Have you ever operated a radio?" Jimmy blinked. "No, sir." "Well, you're about to learn. Sign here." And just like that, Jimmy Dolan became a soldier. Fort Benning, Georgia, January 1942. Jimmy arrived at basic training weighing 142 pounds. He left 10 weeks later weighing 160, all muscle. He could run 5 miles without stopping, do 60 push-ups, field strip an M1 Garand blindfolded in under 2 minutes. But the real change wasn't physical, it was mental. Because at Fort Benning, Jimmy discovered something about himself. He was good at radio. Not just good, exceptional. The Signal Corps instructors noticed it during the 2nd week of training. While other recruits fumbled with Morse code, dots and dashes blurring together into nonsense, Jimmy could hear patterns. He could pick out a message through static that drowned out everything else. One instructor, a captain named Reeves, pulled him aside after a training exercise. "Dolan, how the hell did you copy that transmission? There was so much interference I couldn't hear it myself." Jimmy shrugged. "I just listened for the breaks, sir. The spaces between the static. The signal was still there. You just had to know where to look." Reeves stared at him. "Kid, you've got what we call good ears. Don't waste it." By March 1942, Jimmy had been promoted to private first class and assigned to advanced radio operations training. By August, he was a corporal. And by November 1942, he'd been selected for airborne training. The 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. Paratrooper school was hell. 5 jumps from a C-47. The first time Jimmy froze in the door. The jump master had to literally shove him out. But by the 5th jump, Jimmy was hooked. There was something about it. The free fall, the jerk of the parachute, the silence as you floated down. It made him feel alive. By June 1943, Corporal James Dolan was assigned to the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. His job, regimental radio operator, which meant he'd jump with the headquarters company, set up a portable radio station, and relay messages between scattered paratrooper units after they hit the ground. It was a critical job, dangerous, high casualty rate. But Jimmy didn't think about that. He just did his job. Spring 1944, Southern England. The 101st Airborne spent 4 months training for the invasion. They didn't know where they'd be jumping. They didn't know when, but they knew it was coming. They practiced jumps over the English countryside, practiced night navigation, practiced linking up in the dark using cricket clickers and passwords. And during one of those practice jumps, April 28, 1944, something happened that Jimmy Dolan would never forget. The exercise was called Operation Eagle, a full-scale rehearsal. 1,200 paratroopers jumping near Slapton Sands on the southern coast of England. The plan was simple. Jump at midnight, link up, capture a mock objective, then wait for friendly forces to land on the beach. Jimmy jumped with his regiment. His chute opened clean. He landed in a field, rallied with his unit, set up his radio. Everything went smoothly. Until 0300 hours. Jimmy was monitoring the radio when he heard it. A frantic voice. American. Screaming. "Under fire! I say again, we are taking fire from friendly forces. Beach landing force is shooting at us. Cease fire! Cease fire!" Jimmy's blood went cold. He grabbed the handset. "Station calling. Identify yourself." "Over." Static. Then, "This is Baker 2 Actual. We're on the beach. Navy destroyers are shelling us. They think we're Germans. We need authentication. Now." Jimmy's mind raced. This was a training exercise. Live ammunition wasn't supposed to be used. But someone had screwed up. The Navy didn't know there were American troops on that beach. Jimmy looked at his CO, Captain Frank Lillyman, who was standing next to him. "Sir, we need to send authentication. The Navy's firing on friendlies." Lillyman grabbed the radio, transmitted authentication codes, shouted into the handset. It took 12 minutes to get the Navy to stop firing. By then, 9 American soldiers were dead, killed by their own side. During a training exercise, the incident was hushed up, classified. The families were told it was an accident during maneuvers. But Jimmy Dolan never forgot. and neither did Captain Lillyman. 2 weeks later, Lillyman called Jimmy into his tent. "Dolan, sit down." Jimmy sat. Lillyman lit a cigarette, stared at him. "You remember Slapton Sands?" "Yes, sir." "That should never have happened. But it did. You know why?" "Because the Navy didn't know we were there, sir." "Exactly. Because someone didn't communicate." He leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, kid. In war, the biggest killer isn't the enemy. It's confusion. It's friendly forces shooting each other because nobody told them not to." He took a drag. "When we jump into France, and we will, soon, things are going to be chaos. You understand? Chaos. Units scattered, radios dead, officers killed. And in that chaos, people make mistakes, deadly mistakes." Jimmy nodded. Lillyman pointed at him. "Your job, your only job, is to make sure our guys can talk to each other, no matter what. Even if it means breaking protocol. Even if it means disobeying orders. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Because I'd rather court-martial you for breaking the rules than bury you for following them." Jimmy never forgot those words. June 5th, 1944, 1100 hours. Greenham Common Airfield, England. The final briefing. Jimmy sat in a packed tent with 200 other men from the 502nd. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, sweat, and fear. Colonel Robert Sink, commander of the 506th, stood at the front next to a large map of Normandy. "Gentlemen, this is Operation Overlord, the invasion of Europe. You are looking at the coast of France, specifically the Cotentin Peninsula. Your drop zones are here, here, and here." He tapped the map. "Behind Utah Beach." He paused. "Your mission: secure the causeways leading inland from the beach. Hold them until the 4th Infantry Division lands at 06:30 hours. Without those causeways, our boys will be pinned on the beach. The Germans will slaughter them." Silence. "You will jump at 01:30 hours. Low altitude, 600 feet. Fast drop. You'll be on the ground in under 30 seconds. Someone raised a hand. "Sir, what about flak? German anti-aircraft?" "Heavy, very heavy. Expect casualties before you even hit the ground." More silence. "Any other questions?" No one spoke. "All right. Draw your ammo, check your gear. Planes take off at 22:30 hours. Dismissed." The tent emptied. Jimmy walked out into the sunlight, mind spinning. 600 feet. That was low. But something else bothered him. Something he'd overheard that morning. He'd been walking past the operations tent when he heard raised voices. 2 Navy liaison officers arguing with an Air Force colonel. Jimmy had slowed down, pretending to tie his boot. "Don't care what your orders are. My ships have standing orders to engage any low-altitude aircraft after midnight." "Then you need to rescind those orders." "I can't. They came from Admiral Ramsey himself. Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. So what are you saying? That you're going to shoot down our own planes?" A long pause. "I'm saying, if your planes fly below 1,500 feet over our sector, my gunners won't know they're friendly. We're jumping at 600 feet. Then God help you." Jimmy had frozen. His mind had immediately done the math. 13,000 paratroopers, hundreds of planes, flying at 600 feet over a fleet of Allied warships armed with anti-aircraft guns, in the dark, with no way to identify themselves. It was a death sentence. Jimmy had wanted to say something, run into that tent and scream, "You're going to get everyone killed," but he didn't, because he was a corporal, and corporals don't burst into meetings with colonels and admirals. So he walked away. But the thought stayed with him, all day, all through the equipment checks, the ammo distribution, the final letters home. And now, 6 hours before takeoff, Jimmy Dolan sat on his bunk and pulled out his code book. He flipped through the pages, standard authentication codes, call signs, frequency protocols. And then, buried on page 47, in the section marked Emergency Procedures Restricted, he saw it. A priority code designed for immediate life or death situations. It allowed a radio operator to bypass normal communication channels and send urgent messages directly to any Allied unit, Army, Navy, Air Force, without going through command. But there was a catch. The code was classified, only authorized for use by officers with the rank of major or higher. Unauthorized use was punishable by court-martial, possibly execution. Jimmy stared at the page. Then he tore it out, folded it, and tucked it into his pocket. June 5th, 1944, 22 to 30 hours. The engines roared to life. One by one, the C-47s began taxiing toward the runway. Jimmy Dolan sat in the belly of Chalk 12, Stick 6, squeezed between 19 other paratroopers, his radio pack pressed against his back, his reserve chute pressed against his chest. He could barely breathe. Across from him sat Private Eddie Kowalski, a kid from Pittsburgh with a round, baby face. He was 18 years old. He'd lied about his age to enlist. Eddie was praying the rosary, beads clicking softly through his fingers, lips moving silently. Hail Mary, full of grace. Next to Eddie sat Sergeant Bill Harper, 32 years old, ancient by paratrooper standards, a veteran of North Africa. He'd survived Kasserine Pass, Sicily, Salerno. He was sharpening his trench knife on a whetstone, over and over, the sink sound rhythmic, hypnotic. Next to Jimmy sat Private First Class Tommy Sullivan, a redhead from Boston with freckles and a nervous laugh. He kept checking his gear, buckles, straps, grenades, over and over. At the front of the plane stood Captain Frank Lillyman, jump master, 34 years old, tall, lean, hard as nails. He walked down the fuselage, checking equipment, slapping shoulders, making eye contact. When he reached Jimmy, he leaned in close and shouted over the engine noise, "You good, Dolan?" Jimmy nodded. Lillyman studied him for a second. "You look nervous." "I'm always nervous, sir." Lillyman almost smiled. "Good. Keeps you sharp." He moved on. The plane lurched forward. Engines screamed. The C-47 rattled down the runway. And then, lift. They were airborne. Jimmy looked out the small window. Below, the English countryside disappeared into darkness. Ahead, the black expanse of the Channel. Around them, hundreds of other planes, navigation lights blinking in formation. It looked like a constellation. A river of stars flowing toward France. It was beautiful, and it was about to become a massacre.